You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 14th of March 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, da i niet.
But who will give the orders to cease hostilities, and what will be the price of such orders?
More questions than answers from Vladimir Putin as he responds to the ceasefire plan. We'll unpick the latest developments. As conflict erupts between rival Tigray movements, there are warnings of a new war in Ethiopia, which could inflame the entire Red Sea region. We'll have analysis on the situation in the Horn of Africa. We'll examine the growing tradition of TV dramas during Ramadan in the Arab world. And then, from BMW to UAV, a Swiss drone manufacturing company is reportedly in negotiations to take over a former car manufacturing plant in the Netherlands. We'll get the details. Plus...
And it's important to get in early in this process so that you're ready to hit the ground running, because we're hopeful that there will be a conclusion to the conflict very soon.
We'll be back in Cannes, where our editor-in-chief has been finding out all about a Ukrainian project to create an autonomous city. Andrew Mueller will reveal what he's learned this week. We'll cross to the Balkans for our paper review, and Donatella is off. What's next for Versace as the creative head of the brand stands down? That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Federal judges in 2 states have ordered US President Donald Trump's administration to reinstate thousands of federal workers who lost their jobs as part of mass firings carried out at 19 agencies. Some 6.7 million additional people are expected to be newly displaced around the world by the end of next year, the Danish Refugee Council said today, just as aid cuts from key donors take effect. And an American Airlines plane has caught fire on the runway at Denver International Airport, but all 172 passengers and 6 crew members were safely evacuated. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, the world has been waiting for Russian President Vladimir Putin's reaction to the US-brokered ceasefire plan with Ukraine. When it finally came yesterday, it was inconclusive, and what could be interpreted as a positive response came with many caveats. Well, I'm joined now by Nataliya Vasilyeva, who's contributing reporter to the New York Times, and Dr. Marian Messmer, a senior research fellow in international security at Chatham House. Welcome to you both. Nataliya, what did Putin say?
Hi, good morning. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. His response was inconclusive and can basically be summarized as yes, but. He said that he was not against the idea, that he very much supports the idea of a ceasefire, but there are conditions that Russia would like to see implemented that looks like they could either delay any truce or could make it impossible to achieve.
And what are those conditions?
I mean, he mentioned a couple of things, and some of them sort of echo Russia's demands that we've heard throughout the war, including a halt for supplies of Western weaponry, at least for the duration of the ceasefire, as he put it. He also mentioned that one of the demands could be for Ukraine to halt its mobilization of its troops. So basically making sure that Ukraine is not, getting into a better shape for the next round of fighting as it is. He also mentioned Russia's recent and ongoing advances in the Kursk region, in the only area of Russia, parts of which has been under Ukrainian control, in a sense that Ukrainian troops are still there and Russian forces are in advance. And he basically made it clear that he expected those troops to surrender or face a certain death.
Marian, I wonder what your take on this is from a security point of view.
I think just generally, the big worry is, of course, that by all these preconditions that Putin is setting out, he's essentially setting up a loophole for Russia to not uphold the ceasefire, and that's essentially what President Zelensky and lots of European states have been warning about as Trump has been trying to negotiate the ceasefire.
And Nataliya, I mean, has there been much reaction from Ukraine?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, Ukrainian officials started reacting to Putin's remarks way before his planned meeting with Trump's envoy, who was in Russia last night. President Zelensky called it manipulative. He said that it's a deliberate tactic by the Russian leadership to make it look as if they are supporting a ceasefire, whereas he's coming up with conditions which will, in actual fact, would make it impossible for that ceasefire to come through.
Marian, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko met with Vladimir Putin yesterday. They gave a press conference, and Lukashenko said the negotiating process between America and Russia holds Europe's fate in their hands. Is this a tipping point? Is it overdramatic to say that we're closer to war now than we have been for decades?
I think that's not an exaggeration. I mean, the Russian war in Ukraine has contributed to a worsening of Europe's security situation essentially every single year that it's been going on. And ceasefire negotiations and how they go and what all parties to the conflict do after are such a crucial point in any conflict. I mean, part of my worry essentially is that that Russia is looking for a way to come out stronger in this and to essentially just uphold the ceasefire as long as it serves them. And we've seen all the warnings from various European militaries and various European intelligence services that have essentially said that if there is a ceasefire now, then rather than actually setting up the conditions for a stable peace in Europe, we might be looking at a Russia that, once it's been able to rearm and once it's been able to regroup, might be ready to try something else, whether that's attacking another non-NATO member state or whether that's potentially even trying on a confrontation with NATO.
And we'll come back to NATO in just a moment. Nataliya, I want to pick up on something you said. You mentioned Stephen Witkoff, who's been appointed Trump's special envoy to deal with Putin. He's in Moscow, as you said. It's an odd appointment. He doesn't appear to have any diplomatic experience. I wonder if you could just tell us more about his role and what he's hoping to achieve at the Kremlin.
Yes, exactly. Indeed, that's quite a bizarre appointment, and his role in the Ukrainian negotiations has raised eyebrows. Stephen Witkoff has been appointed as Donald Trump's Middle East envoy, but he has taken this key role in negotiating for reasons unknown. Also, partly due to the fact that the person who was actually appointed the Ukraine envoy has been viewed as too close to Ukraine by the Trump administration. And one thing I would say about him, I know there were lots of reports in the media yesterday about Stephen Witkoff flying into Moscow to meet Putin. We still haven't got a confirmation for that. The Kremlin made it clear yesterday that that Vladimir Putin might be meeting him, and we know that Witkoff stayed in Moscow until very late at night, but still we haven't got a confirmation that he actually met with Putin, and let alone we don't have any readouts of that meeting if that did indeed took place.
So, Marian, chief among Putin's demands are that Ukraine never joins NATO. Now, we know that Trump met with Mark Rutte, the head of the Security Alliance, yesterday. Trump's been making various anti-NATO noises. What was the outcome of that meeting?
Mark Rutte essentially tried really hard to convince Trump that the US was better in NATO than outside of NATO, essentially to assure that European security remains stronger and that European states don't have to solve all the many headaches that would come with a US withdrawal from NATO, especially if it's a sudden withdrawal. And the meeting seems to have gone fairly well, even though Trump, of course, threw some curveballs, among them mentioning the potential annexation of Greenland and saying that NATO could have a really big role in that, which is of course interesting because Denmark is also a NATO member state. And so I think Mark Rutte did as best as he could have done given the circumstances, and he traditionally has had a strong relationship with President Trump, but we'll have to wait and see essentially what Trump's next steps are vis-a-vis NATO.
And I mean, is the whole NATO issue going to be one of the chief sticking points then in the ceasefire agreement, do you think, Marion?
It might very well be. I mean, for Russia, it's a huge no having Ukraine in NATO. I mean, that was essentially part of their reasoning for beginning the conflict in the first place. But it's also going to be really difficult for Ukraine to agree to a ceasefire if their security isn't guaranteed. And at one point, they were discussing having U.S. troops in Ukraine as part of that security guarantee. That, of course, seems to be off the table. And a NATO membership would be essentially another very strong security guarantee. So I think Ukraine will, of course, continue to push for that, but they may end up being in a situation where they have to accept what, from their perspective, would be a less ideal outcome, which would be a peacekeeping force that contains other European NATO members, but not the United States, and something that's not an immediate pathway to NATO membership.
So, Nataliya, what happens next?
Well, first of all, we need to figure out whether there was indeed a meeting between Steve Witkoff and Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin. U.S. President Donald Trump yesterday made it clear that he was still waiting for a reply, that apparently what he heard at that news conference at the Kremlin wasn't an official reply, and he was actually waiting for Putin to be more specific. I think we need to wait for that at this point.
Nataliya, thank you. That's Nataliya Vasilyeva, a reporter at the New York Times. Thanks also to Dr. Marian Messmer, Senior Research Fellow in International Security at Chatham House. This is The Globalist. It's 10:12 in Addis Ababa and 7:12 here in London. The Horn of Africa, an area that encompasses Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti and Eritrea, covers nearly 2 million square kilometres and has a population of about 150 million. It's one of the world's most volatile areas, and it's currently looking increasingly unstable. Ethiopia's Tigray region is witnessing a dangerous power shift as rival factions clash, and both Ethiopia and neighbouring Eritrea are reportedly mobilising troops. There are warnings of a fresh humanitarian disaster and a creeping coup d'etat in the region, which has a long history of conflict, geopolitical tensions and poor regional cooperation. Well, I'm joined now by Patricia Rodriguez, Associate Director at Control Risks Nairobi. Patricia, many thanks for coming on the programme. To fully understand what's going on here, I think it's useful to briefly reflect on the previous conflict between the Ethiopian government and the Tigrayan opposition. It was one of the most lethal wars of the 21st century. It only formally came to an end with the Pretoria Agreement in 2022. What is the background?
Sure, and thank you for having me. So essentially what happened in 2020 was the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the TPLF, launched an assault against federal forces in Tigray. And so that conflict took place over a period of 2 years and, as you said, was eventually negotiated to a peace agreement in November 2022. But what we're starting to see now has its origins in that 2022 peace agreement. During that negotiation, Eritrea was not involved. Eritrea had come into that conflict in Tigray to support federal forces and had actually come to occupy parts of Ethiopian territory during that time. So during the fallout of that conflict, Eritrean forces pulled back. The TPLF itself has started to splinter, and that's because the two key figures that we need to talk about here. One is Getachew Reda, who is the head of the Tigray Interim Regional Administration, who is perceived to be more closely allied with the federal government. And then on the other hand, we have Debretsion Gebremichael, who was the chairman of the TPLF and has quite a few security generals allied closely to him. And so these two individuals have come to have a falling out, and now what we're starting to see is a result of that falling out.
And why is it being referred to as a creeping coup d'etat?
Essentially, what's happened is Debretsion has the support of some of the officials within the Tigray Defense Forces or the regional security forces in Tigray, whereas Getachew has the support of the formal administration. So Getachew is accusing Debretsion and his allies of potentially trying to remove him from power because they have the support of the security forces. So that's why it's being referred to as a creeping coup d'etat.
And could this ignite an interstate war between Ethiopia and Eritrea? I mean, what do we know about both countries mobilizing troops?
So the short answer is yes, it could actually ignite a conflict between the two countries. So Getachew and the Tigray interim administration have the support of the federal authorities in Addis Ababa. But what Eritrea has been doing is essentially taking advantage of the situation. So they have allegedly supported Debretsion's factions and are essentially fomenting a bit of unrest in the region. So what we have here would be potentially a conflict that is intra-Tigrayan, but in terms of the Ethiopian federal forces and the Eritrean federal forces, there's a huge potential for mobilization on both sides to support one side or the other. And we've seen Eritrean troops being called up. There's a general call for conscription in Eritrea. And on the Ethiopian side, there's been significant movements towards the Tigrayan province, which of course borders Eritrea.
Might this also have an effect on neighbouring Sudan, which of course is itself in the grip of a civil war?
Potentially not on Sudan because of just the sheer distance of Tigray to parts of Sudan bordering Ethiopia. But I think the bigger question to ask is around Somalia, because one of the reasons why Eritrea is so kind of keen to support potential domestic insurgents within Ethiopia is because Ethiopia has actually stated its intention to gain access to the sea and at some point said by any means necessary, which was taken by Eritrean authorities as a direct threat to them because the ports in Eritrea would be the closest for Ethiopia to try and access by any means necessary.
So, I mean, picking up on that, I wonder how rivalries amid the Gulf countries over control of the Red Sea play into all of this.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. So the UAE has been very traditionally supportive of Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and is supportive of one of the ports that Ethiopia is potentially going to use in Somaliland, the port of Berbera. So the UAE does have some vested interest in Ethiopia and its kind of ascendancy in this region. I would stress that the UAE and other Gulf actors would not necessarily want to be drawn into a conflict between the two countries, mostly because they have business interest as opposed to kind of geopolitical interest at this point in time in Ethiopia.
So there are strong warnings that the Gulf states and their Western allies must halt this impending conflict, lest it inflame the entire Red Sea region. Are those warnings being heeded? What measures are being taken to defuse the situation?
So we haven't really seen too much effort on the part of Western and Gulf allies to try and actually de-escalate the situation. I think the world as a whole is kind of preoccupied with what's going on in the US. And as long as there's no kind of Western pressure on each party to try and get them to negotiate, it seems that this is one of those issues which will be pushed to the side in the geopolitical kind of context. So there really hasn't much been done except for some statements from mostly from Western embassies encouraging their personnel to leave Tigray. But in terms of trying to de-escalate the situation, we haven't really seen too much effort put.
Patricia, thank you very much indeed. That's Patricia Rodriguez there. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. Federal judges in California and Maryland on Thursday ordered US President Donald Trump's administration to reinstate thousands of probationary federal workers who lost their jobs as part of mass firings carried out at 19 agencies. The back-to-back rulings were the most significant blow yet to the effort by Trump and top advisor Elon Musk to drastically shrink the federal bureaucracy. Some 6.7 million additional people are expected to be newly displaced around the world by the end of next year, the Danish Refugee Council said today, just as aid cuts from key donors like the United States take effect. The UN Refugee Agency said last year that the number of forcibly displaced people around the globe stood at over 117 million people and warned that that number could rise. And an American Airlines plane has caught fire on the runway at Denver International Airport. The Boeing flight to Dallas-Fort Worth was diverted to Colorado after engine vibrations and caught fire while taxiing on the tarmac in Denver. All 172 passengers and 6 crew members were safely evacuated. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It's 7:20 here in London, and we'll continue now with today's newspapers. And joining me down the line from Belgrade is Monocle's man in the Balkans, Guy Delaunay. Good morning to you, Guy.
Good morning, Georgina, and good morning, everyone.
Serbia mega protest incoming, a dramatic headline. What does it mean?
Well, I had to go dramatic because I think it could be rather spectacular in Belgrade tomorrow, Georgina. We're going to have what is quite possibly going to be the largest protest that Serbia has ever seen in Belgrade, the capital, tomorrow. And this is being led by the students who've been protesting for months now following the disaster at the railway station in the second city, Novi Sad, in November. 15 people died when a concrete canopy collapsed. And there's been this protest movement going on ever since, demanding transparency and accountability. And it's not gone away, it's not fizzled out, and tomorrow is going to be the real spectacular after now more than, is it 4 months? Have I got my addition correct here? More than about 4.5 months of protesting. We're going to have, I think, a really spectacular demonstration in Belgrade tomorrow.
And what does the president, Alexander Vučić, say about this?
Well, he's not particularly happy about the demonstrations that have been going on. He has repeatedly described them as an attempt to stage what he calls a colour revolution. This is referring back to the sort of thing that was going on in Ukraine in the 2000s, for example. And he's constantly been trying to say that the students are being manipulated by outside forces, whether that's forces from outside the country or opposition forces. But the students have been very canny about this. They've shunned the involvement of the political parties, and they're very much saying this isn't about politics, this is about accountability and it's about transparency. We want to know all the information about the renovation of this facility in Novi Sad, and we want to find out why those 15 people died who were just standing underneath the canopy outside the station. They suspect that there's been corruption, that corners have been cut. They've been marching with these banners saying corruption kills and you have blood on your hands. But what they haven't been doing is inviting any politicians to share their platform. And that's why it's made it very difficult for Mr. Vučić and the governing Progressive Party to get a grip on what's been going on with these protests.
And Guy, you're in the heart of the city. What's your sense of the mood there?
It's a slightly odd mood. I mean, the people that I talk to, there's a great deal of anticipation. They're saying that people really want to turn out tomorrow. They're going to give the students who are coming in from all over the country, they're going to give them a big welcome in the city centre this evening. Before tomorrow, there's going to be more or less an all-day event with protests in several places around the city, then converging in the centre by Parliament. But, you know, there's a lot of anticipation, and there's also a fair degree of nervousness, because in the run-up to all of this, Mr. Vučić, the president, has been talking about the risk of violence. And this is strange because there's been no violence from the protesters so far at all in 4.5 months. But now Mr. Vučić has started talking about his concerns about violence. We've seen some counter-protesters who are fairly obviously sponsored by the government setting up camp opposite Parliament. And of course the concern is that, you know, if the protesters don't have trouble in mind, that somebody else might do. Somebody else might want to spark something to justify some sort of a crackdown. So there's anticipation and there's nervousness.
Now, I understand also the papers in the region are making much of the Bosnian Serb leader who remains at large.
Yes, indeed. This is Milorad Dodik. This is the president of the Republika Srpska region of Bosnia. And for those who don't remember or take note of such things, Bosnia is more or less divided into two different regions. There's the majority Serb Republika Srpska, and there's the Federation where Croats and Bosniak Muslims mostly live. And there's a very weak central government in the middle. And Mr. Dodik has been trying to make that central government even weaker by pulling Republika Srpska out of the national institutions. And he's had court decisions go against him. He's been ordered in for questioning by prosecutors on charges of undermining the constitutional order, and he hasn't attended that questioning, and the prosecutors have put out an order for his arrest so that he can be questioned. Now, this is a tricky situation because Mr. Dodik is the president of this region, Republika Srpska. He has personal protection from the security officials in Republika Srpska, and they made it quite clear that they don't want him to be arrested. So you've potentially got a conflict between state-level law enforcement officials and those in Republika Srpska, and at the moment it's a bit of a standoff.
And finally, Guy, let's talk about Albania and this ban on TikTok.
Yes, so you're trying to get TikTok in Albania right now, as of yesterday. You're going to find it's rather difficult, and this is because Albania has placed a 1-year ban on that social network, and this has come from the very top. Prime Minister Edi Rama said the social network had been failing to safeguard underage users, and that was a response to an incident last year where an online argument on TikTok escalated into real life and a 14-year-old boy ended up being stabbed to death. So the authorities, haven't been happy that they've got the safeguards they wanted from TikTok, and they have ordered internet service providers to block access to the app and its digital infrastructure. The people who aren't happy about this, Georgina, are the journalists. Their associations say the ban violates freedom of expression and they want to complain to the Constitutional Court.
Interesting stuff. Guy, I hope we're going to be able to check in with you tomorrow during the weekend shows just to find out what's going on in Belgrade. Many thanks for listening to us, for talking to us. You're listening to The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
And now for a closer look behind the headlines. Here's Monica Lillis with a report from Monocle's Mary Fitzgerald about the Ramadan tradition of TV dramas.
Across the Arab world, TV dramas known as Musalsalat have become almost as much of a part of Ramadan as the tradition of breaking the daily fast with a succulent date. Every year, new series are released and served up as a nightly digestif after iftar. The most popular shows have included heady romances, period dramas and slapstick comedy, and these remain stalwart genres today. However, a recent wave of groundbreaking programmes has shown that series dealing with more sensitive topics, including marital breakdown, social inequality and women's role in society, can prove just as popular. This year, 44, a drama about women in their 40s, has been a big hit. Controversy, of course, comes with the territory, as does the ire of conservative clerics and governments. This year there has been heated debate over Muawiyah, the most expensive Arabic language drama ever produced. Its budget was reportedly as high as €92 million. Broadcast by Saudi Arabia-owned NBC, it's a swashbuckling epic about the founder of the 7th century Umayyad dynasty, a polarising figure among Shia Muslims. It has been banned in Iraq over fears it could stoke sectarian tensions, while clerics at Al-Azhar University in Cairo have criticised it for depicting companions of Muhammad. Despite all of this, advertisers have been scrambling for the best slots, knowing they can reach a captive audience. Meanwhile, though, there's still 2 weeks of Ramadan up ahead. Filmmakers and producers are already starting to cook up next year's frothy romances and scandalous dramas.
That report by Monocle's North Africa correspondent Mary Fitzgerald was read by Monica Lillis. And for more from Monocle's editors and correspondents around the world, do sign up to our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. As the seismic shifts in US defence and foreign policy force a military recalibration in Europe, the Swiss drone manufacturing company Destinus has reportedly begun negotiations with the Dutch Ministry of Defence to produce jet-powered unmanned aircraft in what was the Netherlands' largest car manufacturing plant. Well, to tell us more, I'm joined now from Amsterdam by Stefan de Vries, who's European Affairs correspondent at Euronews and BNR News Radio. Stefan, welcome back to the show. What do we know about these negotiations? What is the plan?
Yeah, it is actually quite an interesting plan in the current geopolitical context. In the south of the Netherlands, near the city of Maastricht, there was a huge car factory that had been producing cars for many decades. And last year it closed because there were no more projects to build cars. It was actually the factory where they built BMW, a certain type of BMWs, Mini Coopers. And so these premises are immense, a huge factory. And they are empty. There were already talks with the Dutch government and other defense marks to change this factory into a defense hall or a cluster of defense companies. And now apparently, this is what the Dutch Financial Times is reporting yesterday. This company Destinus, in the hands of the anti-Putin entrepreneur Michal Kokoric, is ready to invest in this former factory to build huge drones. So not the small ones, but actually jet drones, drones powered by jet engines. And apparently the negotiations are almost they can almost go ahead with this transformation of the car factory and start to build drones not only for the Dutch army, but also for other European armies, but also, of course, for Ukraine, because the Netherlands has promised a big investment in drones just for the army of Ukraine. So it's a transformation of a car factory site into a defense site. And maybe this is something we're going to see more often around Europe, where, of course, there are many factories struggling. And now with all the investments that are going to take place in defense, they might also think, hey, this is an interesting market. Let's transform ourselves.
You mentioned the Russian-born owner of Destinus. What more can you tell us about him?
Well, it's a man who was born in Siberia, and he, as soon as the Russian invasion of Ukraine started, he has handed in his Russian passport. He is very opposed to the war and started also delivering arms to Ukraine. This is a pretty reclusive businessman, but it is a former Russian who decided that the invasion was not just, and he helped Ukraine. The company already existed, but the company in the Netherlands was established only 2 years ago. That was actually started by buying a company that makes gas turbines for energy generation. So that was bought by Kokoric. And this technology was very high tech and is very interesting because it fits well in the propulsion of jet engines. So it is a Russian entrepreneur, a former Russian entrepreneur, who now started a business not only in Switzerland, but also in the Netherlands.
Now, we know that this proposal hasn't actually been officially confirmed, but the Dutch Ministry of Defence has said that it does plan to invest millions in drones. I wonder more widely how the Dutch government is responding to the situation in Ukraine and the US's increasingly belligerent and unpredictable behaviour.
Well, there was actually a weird development yesterday. The Netherlands has been on the forefront of the support for Ukraine, together with a few other countries, amongst them the UK and Poland and the Baltic states. The Netherlands was also the country that's actually started negotiation with the United States to deliver F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine. So the Netherlands, since the start of the war, were very staunch supporters of the war of the Ukrainians. However, there's now, since half a year, a populist government of 4 coalition partners. And this week, 3 of those 4 partners, they voted against the plans of the European Union, the Rearm Europe plan to invest 800 billion euros in European defense, because they don't want to spend any more money. Now, this puts the Dutch Prime Minister in a very awkward position, because where the Dutch were actually at the forefront of the help of the Ukraine, now they are the only country in Europe, in the European Union, to vote against the Rearm Europe program. So next week there's a European summit where the 27 member states will decide on this program, and the Dutch Prime Minister will have to go to Brussels and say, yeah, we're in favor of helping Ukraine, but we don't want to spend any money. And this is there was a debate yesterday in the Dutch lower house where the party said, yeah, we are still against it, but you can go to Brussels and say that we're against it, and we don't want to spend any money. So it's a very almost schizophrenic position of the Dutch politicians. They want to help Ukraine, but they don't want to spend money. At the same time, the Dutch are also very pragmatic with this huge amount of money being spent on defense in the next couple of years. The Dutch Ministry of Defense wants to benefit from it and wants to turn, especially the south of the Netherlands, so the site of this huge car factory, into a European defense cluster where a lot of defense will have to be made. But you see how politics and especially populist politics and the reality of the threat of war, they don't really share the bed, and it puts the Dutch government in a very awkward position in the European political family.
Stefan, thank you very much indeed. That's Stefan de Vries, European Affairs correspondent at Euronews and BNR News Radio. You're with Monocle Radio. Monocle Radio has been in Cannes all week for the world's premier property fair, Mipim. While much of the focus tends to be on the big players, this is also an opportunity for lesser-known projects and developments to reach a bigger audience and attract much-needed investment too. Vlasny Misto, an ambitious project to create Ukraine's first and only autonomous city, poised to house 47,000 residents across 600 hectares of pristine land. At its core, it aims to offer a harmonious balance of work, leisure and personal growth, carefully designed to cultivate an environment where both individuals and communities can thrive. Well, earlier, Monocle's editor-in-chief, Andrew Tuck, spoke to Vlasny Misto's COO, Ksenia Lavrantiva, and strategic advisor, Guy Perry. Andrew began by asking Guy what made him want to approach the project, considering the difficulties of doing so whilst the country is still at war.
You have to look long-term. As I say, I go back to the example in Poland. There are very few major investors interested in Poland in 1999-2000. And of course, we know the story changed very rapidly after that. I think it's going to be the same thing in Ukraine. And it's important to get in early in this process so that you're ready to hit the ground running, because we're hopeful that there will be a conclusion to the conflict very soon. We don't know if that's going to be in weeks or months or even years, but we need to be ready to go. We need to be that safe haven where the first investors come and they say, okay, I see what they're doing, I believe in what they're doing, we want to be a part of this. And so I think, for me, it's just a matter of timing. It's going to happen. Whether it happens immediately or a little bit later, we don't know yet. But we have to be preparing for that future now. We can't wait till the conflict ends and then suddenly there's a rush of investment, etc. We need to be ready to catch that investment and channel it in the appropriate ways. And again, set a benchmark for other developments in Ukraine. So we really see this as a project that is not just about Vlasny Misto, but it's about better and best practices for development as Ukraine rebuilds.
Just both of you, well, I was going to come to you saying, tell us about what that benchmarking is. So what makes this special?
For the first, it's re-understand the high level of buildings of residential sector. The second is the win-win economy strategy, because we understand that economy ecological, it's the way to the sustainable city and to the sustainable living of our citizens. So, for example, we are thinking about the businessmen in our city ahead, and we understand their plannings, for example, on the first floors in commercial sectors, and we understand that we cannot have 30 bakeries on the one street because it's non-good competitors. It's a good competitive when you have also the guarantee buyer. It's a good and it's a stable economy, and it's a good stable economic model for the businessman, for the local businessman, and that's why it's one of the also ideas, this economy cluster, just combine it. As well, we understand that, 600 hectares of construction. Vlastne Mesto can be the marketplace, the showroom for new ideas, for new technologies, for new innovations. It can be the joint venture. Why not? That's why we are start thinking wider about the investments, wider about the gathering and the involvement, new partners in the project. We are thinking, local market also want to invest. Why not? You can buy a few square meters in Vlastne Mesto, in Vlastne Hospitality, and be already in community. And in the future, you can buy the residential part. Or you can be the venture investor or developer from a different country, because you understand that, for now in Ukraine, it's risk investments. But in a year, it will be cost much bigger than now. Why not? It can be the joint venture with some of the construction company, because you can come, you can help us to build, and you can help us to involve the investments from different parts. That was a win-win strategy for everyone. We are looking at these connections, we are finding these connections, and we provide it in the Vlastne Mesto.
Guy, what's the market? Who's buying?
Well, basically, there is, perhaps unfortunately, there is a shift in population from the east because of the conflict. Many people are coming to the west. This project is to the west of Kyiv. Everyone assumes Kyiv is going to certainly stay Ukrainian, and hopefully, of course, most of the territory will remain contiguous. But that market, there are still deep pockets. And less deep pockets, people have to live someplace. So they manage. And if, again, I step back and I compare it to my situation in Poland 25 years ago, the market indicated that there was no money. But then it turned out that there was money, that people were willing to invest. They would find money. They would invest in their housing. It's the first thing they invest in, especially if they're coming out of a difficult period. So we see this as a sweet spot for not just international investors in the future, but local investors. And the idea of creating this semi-autonomous community based on sustainability, based on human centricity, is something that is very appealing. So it is a country of nearly 50 million people, 47, I think, million people or so, of course, when they come back, because many are outside the country. Even a small fraction of that market is enough for this project to take off. But I'd like to also add that one of the important things is that we're not just targeting the top of the market. That's kind of the typical developer saying, we're going to do something very luxurious. Not only is that inappropriate at this time, it actually doesn't even make economic sense. You can make mixed communities very effectively. We want school teachers to be able to live in this community. So it's not just an elite compound. It's actually also a community that is integrating itself with an existing village adjacent. So it's not an us and them environment. It's not a gated environment. So we are really part of the fabric of the future of Ukraine. And not just saying, this segment of the market we're going to tackle. No, we're looking at a wider market that does include some of the wealthier individuals, but it's also going to include people with more limited means.
Guy Perry and Ksenia Lavrentiva there, speaking to Monocle's Andrew Tuck at Mipim Property Fair in Cannes. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Now, as it's Friday, it's time for Andrew Mueller's weekly news roundup.
Hard luck and trouble been my only friend.
We learned this week that if there is one person on Earth even more deserving of our sympathy, indeed our anguished, damp-eyed pity, than its most powerful citizen, it is its richest. Aww. We learned that US President Donald Trump, an absolutely prodigious sniveler who actually is as good at whining as he thinks he is at everything else.
No politician in history, and I say this with great surety, has been treated worse or more unfairly.
Was moved, nevertheless, by the woeful plight of billionaire nitwit Elon Musk, who in recent days has suffered crashes of one of his rockets, his social media garbage barge, and the share price of his manufacturer of annoying cars with stupid door handles.
President Trump is vowing to buy a Tesla after the company's stock plunged. Critics blame CEO Elon Musk's focus on his White House role for the stock slide, while protesters are targeting Tesla dealerships across the country.
Seriously, car door handles was a problem which we had, as a species, solved. They were fine as they were, as all right-thinking people concur. But we learned that, say whatever else you will, etc., this was one promise President Trump intended to keep. We learned this from an extremely normal ceremony at the White House, at which the President of the United States, deferring as usual to Elon Musk, and no, Musk was not wearing a suit and tie about which pro-Trump media seemed suddenly strangely unconcerned, presented an array of Teslas, literally while clutching a written sales pitch.
What is this one, Elon?
That's the Model Y.
That's a Model Y, so I have a lot of information to put into price.
Yeah.
I want to make a good deal here. You know, I do notice this. They have one, which is $35,000, which is pretty low.
We learned that Trump intends to pay for his new purchase by check. If it's any consolation to Musk, bouncing is an improvement on crashing. Seriously, it could only have been rendered more dignified by the addition of a platoon of those inflatable wavy arm men, often seen adorning the forecourts of disreputable jalopy-mongers. We learned by way of further incentive that Trump intends to insure Tesla retailers and purchasers against direct action by those who object to Tesla's proprietor doing to the US federal government what he has recently done to one of his rockets, his social media platform, and his company's share price, and declare such vigilantes domestic terrorists.
Those people are going to go through a big problem when we catch them. And we get a lot of cameras up. We already know who some of them are. We're going to catch them. And they're bad guys.
For we have, of course, long since learned that if there is one American office holder who can be absolutely relied upon to take a robust stand against anything even resembling domestic terrorism, it is Donald Trump.
January 6 rioters said to be released from a Washington jail last night thanked President Trump by phone after he issued a sweeping pardon.
So this is January 6th. These are the hostages.
Trump granting clemency to all of the nearly 1,600 people charged in the 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol.
We learned, however, that Trump's geography may be as erratic as his views on domestic terrorism, as he returned once more to his absolutely sane and entirely plausible plans for annexing Canada.
When you take away that artificial line that looks like it was done with a ruler, and that's what it was. Some guy sat there years ago and they said, rah.
That word again.
Rah.
So we learned that Trump dislikes dislikes borders which are artificially drawn straight lines, imposed without regard to any natural features, which is exciting news for Mexico, which can presumably now have California, Arizona and New Mexico back. Seriously, the compilers of this monologue absolutely will buy a fancy dinner for any journalist at one of Trump's press conferences who tests him on state capitals, and not even the really tricky ones like Kentucky or Kansas, like even mid-tier difficult, say North Dakota.
North Dakota
City,
North Dakota,
northern mountains of North Dakota,
of the North. North Dakota City?
Bismarck! It's Bismarck! What is going on in our schools? But sticking with the subject of people failing to do their homework, we learned that the first controversy of 2025's Eurovision season was upon us.
Oh no.
And if this isn't the first, and there have been others, please do not write in. We don't care. Anyway, we learned that there was a thing with the putative entry from Malta by Maltese warbler Miriana Conte, and we learned that the thing was specifically this bit.
Will someone think of the children? Oh no.
I'm absolutely disgusted.
Terrible. Will someone think of the children?
My television and sent Malta the bill.
Indeed, except we learned Malta's Eurovision authorities insist, very possibly somewhat disingenuously, that their singer is not singing what she very obviously is, but is instead enunciating the song's title Kant, K-A-N-T, not as in Immanuel Kant, 18th century Prussian proponent of transcendental idealism, but Kant as in the Maltese word for song, derived from the Latin, i.e. cantus. We learned, however, that Eurovision High Command was not buying this and had ordered that the offending word be dropped and the title changed, at which it's over to our Eurovision desk chief Fernando Augusto Pacheco for a definitive analysis of the uproar.
These crucial, indeed momentous developments will very certainly be taken extremely seriously by people who aren't mental.
We learned that Malta were uncowed by this edict and had vowed to plough on with a rejigged tune for all the good it will do them. We learned upon scrutiny of the odds that bookmakers currently have Malta in the write-your-own-ticket category. Still, we have learned of an answer to the age-old riddle. How do you make a Maltese cross? Tell them to rewrite their Eurovision entry. From Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller.
Thank you, Andrew. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, big news from Versace yesterday. The House released a statement saying that Donatella Versace, sister of the late founder, Gianni, will leave her post as creative director of the brand. Well, Grace Charlton is Monocle's associate editor, and she's very kindly agreed to get up early this morning and join me here in the studio. Grace, many thanks for coming in. Did this come out of nowhere? Was it a shock to fashion insiders?
I don't think it was. She's turning 70 this year, so I'm actually almost relieved for her. She's done so much. But this new Chief Creative Officer, which is a title that sounds like it was workshopped in a boardroom, he's sort of been thrust into the limelight. His name is Dario Vitale, and people seem pretty excited about it.
Yeah, well, tell us about Vitale. What direction will Versace take under his leadership?
Yeah, I'm not sure because he is such an unknown, but he worked at Miu Miu since 2010, so that's 15 years. In the fashion world, it's like dog years. Like, that is an incredible show of loyalty. Versace has been struggling. There were rumours that the house was going to be sold to the Prada Group. It's currently part of Capri Holdings, which is the American multinational that was founded by Michael Kors. And now it seems quite likely that a sale will happen if there's someone from Miu Miu stepping in, which is a brand from the Prada Group. I don't think it takes Sherlock Holmes to put these pieces together.
What has Donatella herself said about this and about her next move?
Well, she's still going to be involved in the brand as a sort of chief brand ambassador. She is Versace. She, is the woman that she designs for. I don't think she'll ever be able to fully ever step back. But no, I think she'll hopefully enjoy a bit of more of a retirement.
Absolutely. Now, there's also big news from Gucci. There's change afoot there too.
This news actually came as a surprise. I don't think anyone saw this coming. Everyone thought Eddie Slimane from Celine was going to go to Gucci, but they chose Demna, who is a Georgian-born designer who is currently at the helm of Balenciaga.
So what's he going to bring to the brand?
Oh, so much star power. I am a Demna apologist. I think he is the creator of our generation. He's going to define the Gen Z millennial aesthetic. I'm so excited for this. The online response hasn't been as positive. People aren't sure if he'll be able to shake it up that much at Gucci.
Why so?
Well, I think because he is very ironic, very pop in the sense that he's popular. It's for the people. He does a lot of streetwear. He's sort of disruptive. Gucci is more fun-loving Italian, party.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of this kind of revolving musical chairs we see so often in the fashion world, what's behind that?
Well, I think it's always economical. I think all these brands are really struggling. There was a big downturn at the end of last year that was really well documented. The Chinese market is collapsing. I think all of these brands are under so much pressure to deliver growth, and they think that they're going to be able to achieve this by churning through the sort of executive level and the creative directors. But I'm actually not sure if they're allowing these designers to turn around the fortunes of a brand because they don't have the luxury of time. They just stay there for 2 years and then they're sort of immediately given the boot.
Yeah. Donatella Versace, of course, had the luxury of a lot of time. She really, really had years to develop her entire oeuvre, if you like. What do you think the highlights are from her years as creative director?
It's so funny because the Versace brand and look is not at all aligned with my own personal taste, but I love it so much. I love what she's done. She turned it into a lifestyle brand. They've got Palazzo Versace in Dubai and Macau. They do interiors. I think also another big highlight from Donatella Versace, which everyone talks about, is that jungle foliage dress that Jennifer Lopez wore to an event in the 2000s. And that is why we have Google Images, because so many people were interested in seeing it that Google had to create. Isn't that interesting? Did you know that?
I had absolutely no idea.
Yeah, but I think what is maybe sad for Versace is how all of these iconic moments and viral is such a bad word, but the sort of really popular moments that we know from them, they haven't been happening in the last 10, 15 years, if I'm being charitable. It's all been in the 90s and the 2000s, in the, the supermodels and that look. So hopefully, you got to create new memories.
Finally, a tricky question, but one I hope you can answer.
God.
Did Donatella jump or was she pushed?
Oh, no, that's a good one. I think she jumped. She's turning 70 in May, the 2nd of May, to be precise. I would like to think that she's just happy to retire. I see her as well as just a Karl Lagerfeld-esque figure. She's just so mythical. She's got amazing, one-liner quotes, and I don't think she was pushed. I hope not. It's her lifeblood. It's her work. It's her name.
And she'll stay involved, of course.
Always, yeah.
She'll be a sort of brand ambassador?
Yeah, it's sort of a really, really big influencer. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question, how she'll be involved. I think what it actually means is that she'll show up to the Met Gala and, wearing a Versace dress and going to fabulous events. And good for her.
Yeah, hard work, but someone has to do it.
Someone's got to do it.
Thank you very much, Grace Charlton. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks also to our producers Hassan Anderson and Monica Lillis, our researcher Francesca Gilks, and our studio manager Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Mariella Bevan and Hunter Wang. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. Lots of great programming coming up. We've got the entrepreneurs, we've got the big interview, we've got the foreign desk, all sorts of sharp shows for you to listen to. And the briefing is back at midday. That's live in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.